Well, for more on President Xi's visit to the two Asian nations, I'm joined by Dan McClory, live from Irvine, California. He's president and head of China at Boustead Company. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rachelle.
So let's start with the key takeaways from President Xi's speech at Apec. What stood out to you the most?
Well, I think it's about the multilateralism, the pluralism, if you will, that Mr. Xi and China, not surprisingly, are bringing to the region. When you consider the withdrawal of the U.S. from TPP, China has clearly stepped right into that role. Some might say ironically or surprisingly. I don't think there's much surprise. These are very important trading relationships, very important maritime relationships that China shares with all of the ASEAN countries. So Mr. Xi is continuing to be the standard bearer for the unification and the multilateralism of the region.
Now, looking at China's role, let's also look at Vietnam. In terms of the most important deals that were signed, what were the real big takeaways there?
I think there's two main categories, Rachelle. One is in aquaculture. So this is, growing of generally high-value, high-margin fish and seafood products. And the other is in infrastructure. So you heard of a number of infrastructure projects, from a port development that's been put underway to actually talking about bringing in loan guarantees from the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And of course, those infrastructure projects are, for the most part, tied into the Belt and Road Initiative, one of China's key priorities, certainly coming out of the People's Congress, and as something that is going to really drive growth in the region for the next decade.
And let's also look at Laos now, where China is the largest investor and also the second largest trading partner. What do you think their priorities are when it comes to economic cooperation?
Well, I guess the first question is Laos, this tiny landlocked Asian nation. What's the strategic significance of Laos? And it's quite important. It's really, think of connecting the dots. There are 8 other Asian countries through which you can get through if you can successfully build infrastructure and linkages through Laos. So that's what you're going to see. We heard about some of the rail initiatives. There's a 260-mile railway that's going right through the heart of mountains and jungles, about a $6 billion cost that China is actually putting into place, again, to keep that Belt and Road Initiative flowing. So I think infrastructure is going to be a major area. And the precedent to this was a military exchange between Laos and China, because again, they share a border. There is cooperation taking place between the military forces of both countries. They want to make sure that that's secure and at the same time open. So I would say the military cooperation preceded what now is some fairly significant for a nation of Laos' size, infrastructure development.
And speaking of regional integration, let's look at the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, or FTAP, which has this long-term goal of really harmonizing the multilateral and bilateral trade deals in the region. Where do things currently stand, especially in light of what we've seen with TPP, and what are the main sticking points?
Right. Yeah, this is a really good topic, Rachelle. I can also look at, I can almost look at that organization as being a mini WTO. I really shouldn't use the word mini, because understand that all the nations that are affected comprise about 1/3 of the world's GDP. So it's extremely significant from an economic standpoint. It's also functioning as a quasi-mini United Nations. So it has broad significance. And as you've pointed out, what it is attempting to do is to harmonize or normalize some of the other trade and intergovernmental organizations in the region. And you could say TPP was dealt a big setback when, as we were joking before, it stands for Trump pulls the plug, and the U.S. came out of TPP, but it's now been signed, so it's definitely going ahead. So I think being a nice support foundational organization that will help harmonize the geopolitical as well as the economic organizations in the region is the most important function of that organization.
All right, well, thank you as always for your insights. Dan McClory there, President and Head of China at Boustead Company.